No, what did I do?
All right. Welcome to the UNM Law and Mental Health Series, weekly discussions of practice and science, featuring experts in the behavioral health and the law. This series is run by the Division of Forensic Behavioral Sciences of UNM's Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences, in support with the New Mexico Behavioral Health Services Division. I'm Kaisa Marshall, an assistant professor here at UNM. For our talk today, please ask questions in the Q&A box anytime that you feel comfortable, but just know that we will not get to them until the end. We always try our best to get to as many of your questions as possible, but please forgive us if we cannot get to yours. If you are pursuing continuing medical education, the sign-in sheet will be in the chat shortly. If you are pursuing APA continuing education, the link will appear later around the 50-minute mark. You have to save your certificate after you've completed the survey because we don't keep copies. If you missed our most recent talk in the series, Dr. Melissa Slavin's discussion of gambling disorder in legal settings is now available on our YouTube channel. The link for that channel will be posted in the chat box. The recording for this week's talk should also be available on our YouTube page later this week, and the PowerPoint slides will also be available for people registered for the series later this week as well. As a heads up, for next week's talk in the series, we have Dr. Caitlin Kavanaugh, who will be discussing adolescent development and the juvenile justice system. But let's get back to this week. I'd like to introduce you to today's speakers, who will be discussing mentoring and supporting underrepresented professionals. This is Dr. Natalie Anumba and Dr. Lara Guzmán-Hosta. Dr. Natalie Anumba is a forensic psychologist and associate professor at the University of Massachusetts Medical School, where she serves as a co-director of the Law and Psychiatry Program in the Department of Psychiatry. She conducts evaluations of adults involved in criminal proceedings, serves as a violence risk consultant to the state psychiatric hospitals, provides expert witness testimony, and supervises postdoctoral trainees and new professionals. She's an active member of the American Psychological Association and American Psychology Law Society, APLS, and is a member at large of APLS. Dr. Lara Guzmán-Hosta is a forensic psychologist working at the Forensic Services Division of the Massachusetts Department of Mental Health. She has worked in the juvenile justice system and adult correctional and inpatient forensic evaluation services across the state. Currently, she works as a designated forensic psychologist at the Metro Boston Adult Court Clinic team. Dr. Guzman-Hosta is active within APLS, currently the chair of the practice committee, and a member of the Broadening Representation, Inclusion, Diversity, and Global Equity, or BRIDGE committee. She has authored and co-authored articles on cross-cultural issues in psychological assessment. She has provided education on cultural issues in forensic mental health practice, locally and internationally. She was born and raised in Puerto Rico, where she also completed her graduate work, and is an alumni of the Center for Multicultural Training in Psychology. So, Drs. Anumba and Guzman-Hosta, on behalf of UNM, we're excited to have you join our series and thankful for you sharing your expertise with us today. I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having us. We're very happy to be here and to talk, especially about this topic today. Let's see. Here's some CE information, but I think there's also links and everything being put in the chat. We don't have any financial arrangements or any disclosures to make. And I'm just going to skip right on ahead, just because I know we have limited time together today. But basically, we're here today to talk about mentoring, especially across cultures. And in thinking about this, we have ongoing demographic shifts in the general population of the United States. These shifts have long been trending towards increasing diversity among multiple dimensions, particularly race and ethnicity. And psychology is and has consistently been a relatively popular major among undergraduate students. So it only follows that the psychology pipeline is diversifying in its composition, and that's going to show up in the psychologist workforce. Despite these trends, people of color remain underrepresented among psychologists and academic faculty. And when we think about the specialty area of forensic psychology or psychology and law, the psychologist workforce resembles neither the general population, the psychologist workforce, nor the populations involved in the legal system. What's really notable is that professionals in this specialty commonly feel underprepared to address cultural considerations in their work, and there's some indications in research of limited preparation for this during psychology training. Further compounding this issue are challenges in developing and maintaining the professional pipeline. So I think we all know that we are dealing with a dearth of people to meet the need for forensic psychology research and practice. We also have the fact that forensic psychology practice has relatively high barriers to entry. So the requirement of a doctor, licensure, specialized training, some jurisdictions might have additional requirements beyond that. So the jurisdiction that Lara and I practice in, that's one of those. And while that is in keeping with APA's recognition of forensic psychology as a specialty area of practice, the side effect is that this introduces more links into the chain that makes the career pipeline, which means that there's basically more opportunities for loss to follow up. And my own sort of anecdotal observation is that, this field generates a lot of interest, but not a lot of opportunities for exposure, especially at earlier training stages. So I'm thinking like high school, undergraduate levels. At my work setting, we have some students who get in contact with us. They're interested in learning about the field. They're interested in doing some sort of shadowing for a day or two. And that is absolutely not allowed in our practice settings due to safety, privacy, liability reasons. There's many reasons for agencies to kind of clutch their pearls. Unfortunately, this also is a loss because there's a lot of potential to capture people with interest and with potential to bring them in, we can bring them into the field, but we're losing out on that. And so in thinking about common experiences of underrepresented professionals, and this is based on literature concerning the experiences of professionals who are just underrepresented in their fields in general. So it's not just psychologists, it's also in academia, et cetera. And a lot of these experiences include isolation, or a particularized imposter phenomenon. So imagine having thoughts or feelings that you don't belong, you're not qualified, combined with social messaging with just that content, as well as cultural ignorance. So a general lack of knowledge about how people's experiences are shaped by race or ethnicity and culture due to factors such as a lack of completeness in education. As I had said just a few moments ago, professionals commonly report feeling underprepared to deal with this in their daily practice. We also have experience such as microaggressions, tokenism, so the sensation of, or the phenomenon of being one of only a few or being the only, as well as undervaluation of one's academic or clinical interests, which can be perceived as lacking objectivity and or scientific rigor, tendency to be shifted into service work, promoting inclusion that is at the same time overlooked and unrewarded, or being sort of relegated to specialty areas of practice or research.
And Natalie, I was going to mention that, one of the reasons why we've been, both Dr. Anumba and I have become involved in discussions about mentorship is that back in the day, she and I had conversations about how to find a mentor for ourselves, because we also saw a way forward for us. We're looking for some support, and we we then went on a search, so to speak, of how to find our people, right? How to be intentional about connecting, particularly with BIPOC mentors who could talk to us about their experiences, understand where we were. That was relatively unique to us. And help us, over the path of our careers. And those conversations evolved into what presentation we have today, in addition to us being able to also be able to connect with some wonderful mentors. So for example, Natalie and I have known each other for many years, but back in 2018 was the first time we actually worked together in the same location. And we started these conversations about looking for mentorship, and we ended up connecting with Antoinette Kavanaugh, who donated her time very generously to us both, and met with us at least once a month for a substantial period of time, until we naturally ended up connecting with her at APLS. And so that's one example of what motivated us to generate this talk. And also, now we're at the stage in our career where we have conversations more about how to support and mentor others. And so that, again, it's kind of comes full circle, but it's also about being intentional about finding your people and finding people that that could help support you, but then being at a stage later in your career where you can also support others and how to do that as well. We were also very fortunate that Dr. Danielle Rinchek invited us to do a presentation at the last APLS conference called Beyond Representation, where a whole host of talented panelists discussed the representation and sometimes underrepresented contributions of Black and Brown folks in psychology and the law. And we presented a version of this talk there. I think that's where the context of this talk emerged, and we're always so happy that there is an audience for this, because it's so important.
Exactly. And let me see if it works. Okay. Yeah. And so when we talk about mentorship, because I think there's a lot of discussion, but I always kind of like to go back to the sort of nuts and bolts basics to see what are we talking about here. And mentorship has been identified as a form of professional socialization. It provides guidance and support specifically for a junior colleague. So it involves a junior-senior relationship. So a more senior mentor serves not only as a model or a teacher, or source of support, but can also facilitate aspects of professional development and networking that may not be available to a junior colleague. The literature shows that mentorship is associated with increased productivity, self-efficacy, and career satisfaction. And a lack of mentoring has been identified as a barrier to career success, in part because of the, limited access to social capital, issues negotiating institutions, figuring out those unwritten rules, and then as well as not receiving things such as encouragement. Professionals from underrepresented groups, so that includes not only BIPOC individuals, but also women, tend to receive less mentoring than peers and tend to have more limited access to matched mentors. So mentors who match the mentee among certain identity dimensions. And when we have had our conversations, Lara and I, we've also thought about what about the culture? So given the reality, increasing, changes in the workforce population matched with sort of the ongoing lack of representation, what does this mean in terms of how we can work culture into this? And matching can be important, but it is not always necessary, especially given the relative lack of diversity in our field. So mentoring can be effective and beneficial regardless of background, and that's because it involves a foundation of mutual respects and shared interests. And in the literature, the mentor skills and qualities that have been identified as most helpful include sort of the selflessness, active listening skills, honesty, a non-judgmental attitude, persistence, patience, and appreciation of diversity. And then there's some other parts as well that I think Lara wants to comment on.
One of the less traditional but very effective ways that folks can be effective with mentorship is with access to opportunities and opening doors. We often sort of assume that mentorship is something where you schedule someone for an interview and you talk to them regularly, which can be, but certainly there are times when, especially, let's say if you're in the role of a mentor and you have a position of power or a position where you can facilitate opportunity, that being able to help that person, extend your hand, get them in the door, it's also as equally as important, especially when it comes to BIPOC representation in psychology and the law. So again, figuring out ways to conduct mentorship that's in the box, but also outside the box, using your power and your access to opportunity to facilitate those for mentees as well.
And when we think about cross-cultural mentorship, there's been some discussion of this and, what makes for good cross-cultural mentorship. And some of the factors that have been identified include positive affect and rapport, intercultural sensitivity and exploration, an understanding of history, and awareness of larger social context. In addition, it's also helpful to consider organizational climate. So not just everything going on outside, but then what's also going on inside right here in our house. So this would require the mentor to do some internal work to communicate across culture or identity. And this kind of relationship can really help the mentee identify inequities, develop resilience, and lay a foundation for overcoming internal and external barriers to achievement. And of course, it's also a blueprint for future mentoring because a lot of times, and this is speaking from personal experience, the mentee kind of develops professionally and then turns attention to reaching out and sort of helping up the even more junior persons.
Okay. All right, so now we're kind of discussing the decolonial mentorship framework, which has helped me kind of contextualize mentorship and my framework for it. And I came across this model by reading the book Decolonial Psychology Toward Anti-Colonial Theories, Research, Training, and Practice that was edited by Comas Diaz, Adames, and Chavez Dueñas. But there's a specific chapter, chapter 10, that deals with mentorship in an anti-colonial framework. And that chapter was authored by Gertz, Adames, Parker, Chavez Dueñas, De Luna, and Perez Chavez. So the basic framework is this idea, right, that frames our field in coloniality. Coloniality is described as a pattern that emerged from the colonization of Black, Brown, and Native cultures and peoples. And that has had a pattern of continuance in our world as we are today, particularly when it comes to the field of psychology and mental health. Coloniality manifests through racial classification, power structures that perpetuate a lack of diversity, and socialization patterns that stress the domination of thinking that is not Black and brown. So decolonial mentorship contemplates mentorship that is racially conscious, that fosters growth, and promotes critical consciousness. So, for example, finding ways to engage in transformative action by fostering self-acceptance by the mentee, for example, if that has been something that has been an issue. So the idea is that there's a critical consciousness that centers race, ethnicity, and culture as opposed to decentering it, which is often the goal of kind of melting pot ideology, right? In many ways, because psychology is so European centered, trainees become socialized in the profession and in European centric perspectives through the values of the profession, through studying, seminal texts and the modeling of senior professionals such as supervisors, mentors, etc. But in decolonial psychology, we look to sort of highlight those ideologies as opposed to making it seem like it's the default. So values such as individualism, competition, meritocracy are discussed in contrast with collectivism, cooperation, and discrimination. And the model has 4 pillars and guiding principles that have come from various theories, but primarily from liberation psychology, as well as the model proposed by Helms in 1990 that centers on racial identity, social interaction model. So the 4 pillars are starting with resisting psychocolonization, right? Psychocolonization is this idea that psychology in and of itself is colonized, right? There is an inherent Eurocentric perspective in psychology. Because it has been propagating a Eurocentric perspective, that we as psychologists have, in order to become more conscious, that we need to resist that and also become informed about other models of conceptualizing mental health and understanding mental health and behavior. And understanding also that there are models and concepts that are Eurocentric that don't have any relevance to non-European cultures and vice versa. Understanding also ways in which psychology can pathologize non-European ways of being, and fosters a certain level of pathology for Black and brown individuals as well as Native cultures. So how do we resist psychocolonization, particularly when it comes to the context of mentorship? We try to understand BIPOC perspectives in mental health and illness and healing, understanding the histories of marginalized cultures and peoples, such as understanding what are some practices that have been deemed to be pseudoscience or pathologized, and understanding their place in history and why they have been deemed a certain way. Rejecting colorblind ideology, challenging mentees to question how knowledge is produced, right? How do we arrive here in our field? How do we come to accept that these things are the way that they are? And to challenge people, the mentee also to reflect on their own role, their own identity in our systems. Then we move or think about reorienting to decolonial psychology, which is continue on this path of freeing ourselves from coloniality, right? Recognizing in our own mentors and mentees their own role and fostering self-reflection, including also self-care and preventing burnout. That's something that it's really important for BIPOC trainees. And I know that as an emerging professional, I struggled with as well. And sometimes fostering representation in our field can go hand in hand with also fostering burnout and driving people to a point where they decide, I can't continue on this field, whether it's because they've been discriminated in their workplaces or training programs, or because we are working too much. There's mentorship has a role in that as well. That is also part of decoloniality. And again, thinking about the principles of liberation psychology, like honoring historical memory, people's strengths, and having that critical consciousness of what the systems of oppression are. The next pillar is recognizing racial identity and power. Again, this idea that we're engaging in self-reflection, not only for the mentor, but for the mentee, and together in unison, having conversations about racial identity. People's also who have marginalized parts of their identity, but also parts of their identity that have privilege, and how to manage those things in unison. And discussion of power dynamics, not only in the systems where we operate, but also in the mentorship dyad, right? It builds this idea that we are modeling some of the principles in the mentorship relationship that we discuss that operate outside the mentorship relationship. And finally, rebuilding for an anti-colonial future. It's a reflection on all the 4 pillars that we discussed, having active reflection, continuing to seek respect and gain knowledge about Indigenous peoples and cultures, and learn about psychological approaches that are non-European, that are intersectional, and that apply to all the various cultures as well.
And so thinking about us, so, how do we mentor, Lara and I? And when we discuss this, I think it's also really important to think about, what have been our challenges. So we have up here, systemic challenges that are sort of testing the limits. And here I'm thinking about things like time, resources, workload, that sort of thing. And then also sometimes we have had the opportunity to talk to a lot of different people, and sometimes things aren't always the best match. Either there's sort of like a difference in goals or in needs and what can be provided. So that can be a challenge that comes up. And then also things like life circumstances. So imagine working with somebody who is drowning and they have needs that you can't meet right now. Or imagine trying to work with someone while you're drowning, and it's just enough. It's all you can do just to hold your head above water, things like that. And Lara, I don't know what else you wanted to chime in. with that.
Yeah, I mean, that just reminds me sometimes of, even back in the day when I was a therapist, I no longer am, but this idea of sitting with folks where they're at, it's really important, right? I've worked with many of people that I've either supervised or mentored who at times bring issues to me that are beyond, um, that there's no easy solution to, or that kind of envelop us both, right? Both the mentee and the mentor are caught up in this system. And as we're trying to figure that out, I kind of go back to this idea of how to thrive and survive an oppressive system. Um, yes, there are times when it feels like, you know, um, wow, psychology and the law, it seems kind of antithetical to all of these things we are discussing. And yet, the system requires people like us to be able to change it from within. But if we run ourselves to the ground and if we take ourselves out of the running, then folks like us will not be available to those who need us. So I always think of, okay, how to be present when folks, mentees might just need to, someone to hear them, someone to validate their experience, and also have this like modeling for how to resist even at times when you feel like giving up. Those are definitely some thoughts I have. There are times too, like as Natalie was mentioning, where just reflecting back on coming up with barriers for mentorship. And I certainly have had a number of experiences where mentorship has been more organic, and other experiences where mentorship is more, I guess, institutional, or there's been like a formal placement, and I've participated in a certain program, and there's kind of pros and cons to both. But there are times I would say that working in very specific programs that are geared toward mentorship, at times folks are placed with people that just organically there's no there's not a lot in common, or there you struggle to kind of get your foot in and help this person or support this person. And I think that's normal. I think that sometimes you're not gonna have the same experience or success with everybody, but at least in my experience, the most rewarding mentorship experiences I've had have come more organically for me. But I've certainly also been asked to support and help out in other ways, for example, in our organization and other places where I belong. So I think it's good to have your hands in both kinds of situations and see what works.
And then not to just be fully negative about it. We've also had a lot of triumphs. So seeing people succeed, seeing mentees go off and become colleagues, by which I mean, they meet the potential that you knew that they had. Or when people with, after the encouragement, they go for that award or that job opportunity, or they meet a goal despite self-doubt. One of my triumphs actually, was somebody who was thinking about coming into the field, coming into psychology, and then didn't. We, sat down, we had some conversations. They're telling me about what they were about, what they, their goals, their values. And then I was like, I feel like you should go over to the website for the National Association of Social Work and click over and look at that code of ethics and see, because I'm seeing a lot of parallels. And after some conversation, they realized that was kind of what they wanted to do. So I guess I guided them out of the fields, but I think it was much better to do that before, doing the graduate school thing and sinking all this time and money. And I consider that a win, because this was really kind of finding somebody's like really their calling, what they wanted to do, and kind of helping them sort of on their way, and helping them figure that out. So that's kind of what comes to mind for me.
Yeah, I've had really good experiences. I think some of the most surprising experiences is like you mentioned, Natalie, of having a mentorship in like a certain period of my career, and it's like and marked in this context of time, not hearing from this person for years, and then just suddenly getting the phone call some years later asking either for a consult, or I work here and I have this trainee that wants to, get their, get some information, can I send them your way? And it just, it is definitely very satisfying to see that, or even seeing them asking for advice on how to mentor others. That's definitely also very rewarding as well.
And so in thinking about how can we all mentor, I think it's really important to recognize that mentorship can take different forms. If there's a different length of time associated with it, there's different dynamics, because it really depends on the needs of the mentee, first and foremost, and what the mentor is able to provide. So there can be conversations or discussions of, I think they call it like patchwork mentoring, where you get some things from one person, some things from another, rather than one person giving all things. And in thinking about the mentoring relationship, it can include regular meetings and a long-term relationship. It can just mean keeping, your door open to networks, to former mentees. It can involve teaching and supervision. It can include alerting to certain opportunities, facilitating them, advocacy. I personally like matchmaking. So having somebody over here who has some sort of skill and is looking for some way to advance, and then there's somebody over there who's looking for somebody to work with, somebody with certain skills. And then I really like doing the introduction and then like fading away as they then embark on some new project or something.
Yeah, I certainly have like an open door policy with all the people that I've mentored. And as I mentioned earlier, I really enjoy hearing from people, and I don't necessarily like, at least in my experience, and certainly when I was mentored, it was mostly by supervisors or folks that I reached out to. Sometimes we would have formal meetings, other times we would have, just check-ins or questions. And I've certainly had that approach in my mentorship where folks reach out to me with specific things. And other times when we are naturally in the same space, and we check in with each other more regularly. And then those kind of sessions become much more focused. And again, having this open door policy that once you're connected with me, like you're part of my crew, you're part of you're one of my people, and understand that I may reach out. I do tell folks like there might be a day when, right now you're evolving, you're an evolving professional, you're needing my support, but there will be a day where you're gonna come into your power, and I'm gonna ask you to help out someone else. And so that's always a discussion, and also an understanding that this is probably going to be a lifelong process. You can call me today, you can call me 5 years from now, I will answer your call. And that's always kind of been my approach as well.
I also wanted to highlight advocacy, but before I go off, I want to hear Lara, because she has like some really good thoughts about this. So I want you to talk about this more.
Oh, the advocacy. Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I encourage folks is like, because I think part of just thinking decolonial psychology in general, right? Like, especially because we are psychology and the law practitioners. And I realize that our audience is bigger today. We may have attorneys and we have social workers and other professionals who work in the field of mental health and the law. But just in general, I think one of the things I worry about is that oftentimes for those of us who are practitioners in wherever field that we are, if we only interact with people from marginalized identities only when we step into a courthouse or when we step into the jail or the, or the hospital, inpatient forensic hospital or whatever, then even if you're trying to resist that decolonial mentality, right, your experiences with folks from those cultures are contextualized by this system. And so I do encourage folks to participate in other areas that would give them exposure to people with intersectional and marginalized identities that have nothing to do with the criminal justice system. Like, for example, with advocacy organizations, I'm part of the Human Rights Commission in my town. I do a lot of advocacy work either in my town or with nearby towns. And it does give me like a bigger perspective of what are some folks of, BIPOC folks in my community doing for their own communities. And it helps me participate in that. It helps me understand that the community has agency, right? And so what are some ways in which folks can get involved in understanding culture from a non-pathology, non-correctional, kind of legal perspective? Those are things I definitely encourage my mentees to engage in as well, outside courtrooms, outside correctional facilities.
Yeah, same. I think that engaging in, I'm going to call it both community service and professional service is really important and necessary. So going out and doing some sort of volunteer thing, working with local organizations to get a sense of, what does the community need? And rather than somebody coming in as an expert and telling them, just listening and hearing, okay, so this is what's going on here. This is what, this is where the need is. And then that can help open doors or give ideas or inspiration for ways to contribute meaningfully. And in thinking about how do we find opportunities for mentoring, given that it can take all sorts of different forms and different things, it's helpful to really kind of recognize that it varies by stage of training. So there's opportunities at the high school level, and a lot of that's going to be a lot of like talks and interviews. So providing education, exposure to students with potential interest in the field. So I've done things like, be interviewed for somebody's paper or whatever, where it's just, oh, what's a typical day like? And then I'm like, well, there isn't one. It's very busy. And having that kind of conversation and just sort of being open and available. At the undergraduate level, it might be kind of the same, but then there's also things like connecting interested students with research opportunities or saying, oh, you should take such and such class because that's actually really, really relevant. And it's a way for you to kind of get a sense of the scope of the field. At the graduate level, that would include including students in training, in research, highlighting practice opportunities, especially those beyond what's available through their graduate program. So maybe a graduate program has like sort of the same spots, but if you happen to know some group over there would be willing to take on a practicum student or something like that, helping to get that ball rolling in terms of either connecting a student with that or just, talking to the director of clinical training, for instance, and saying, hey, this is a potential site. At the internship and postdoctoral levels, it's going to be a lot of talking about, locating and applying for programs. And there's going to be a little bit more like focus on professional development. At the early career stage, it's a lot of a lot of focus, I think, is going to be on learning how to be an adult with a job. And so, the professional development, life stuff, navigating professional and ethical challenges, navigating institutions and organizations, ongoing learning and continuing education, and then thinking about retention and advancement. It doesn't just end at the early career stage. So at the mid-career stage, mentoring would be, slightly different flavors. It's going to be a focus on broadening or applying the skills and the experience that person has cultivated throughout their career, maybe developing management, administrative, or leadership skills to meet increased responsibilities. And I can tell you that's sort of where I'm at. And so where originally, I'm being asked to do things that I didn't necessarily learn how to do in school. And I thought at first I was being promoted past my level of competence. And then it, turns out that no, it's just there's just certain tasks that, once somebody walks me through, I kind of get how to do them and I can move forward. And so that's a way that mentorship can be really helpful at that career stage. And then thinking about advanced career stage, there's going to be considerations around retiring, either retiring and being done or retiring, kind of shifting to do some new stuff, striking new directions and generativity. And so in thinking about what we can do, there's the cold call or emails. I've gotten those. There's formal mentorship programs that are developed, in a very intentional way. There's the workplace connections. Hey, we work at the same spot. Let's talk about what's going on here at this institution. There's also colleague referrals. I've gotten those. I've done those. And that's basically when I become somebody's homework assignment, basically. So a colleague says, oh, go talk to Dr. Anumba about such and such. And they might drop me a note to say, hey, I'm sending somebody to talk to you. And then that person, and that's their big step, reaching out to somebody they don't know. So that is definitely something that happens and is perfectly acceptable. Conferences, I've happened to have met people that I really admire just by taking that chance and going up to them at a conference, and getting sort of rewarded by it. I'm also going to mention community and professional volunteering, again, because then there's opportunities to introduce people from different circles and also to develop an ongoing relationship. And then, of course, for those from the BIPOC communities, the LGBTQIA communities, I think Lara also has some additional wisdom as far as that goes.
I was going to say, if you are part of either those communities or an advocate in those communities and circles, that you interact with them either because you're doing advocacy or you're doing research or those kinds of things, that's also a great opportunity for people to know that you're looking to mentor and help others. I certainly have received a lot of requests or be approached by folks belonging to various organizations that I am regularly a part of. So for example, I'm an alumni of the Center for Multicultural Training in Psychology that's affiliated with the Boston Medical Center and Boston University School of Medicine. And I finished that program a long time ago, but I am part of the alumni. I actively participate in alumni activities and stay connected with the program. So when an intern or a former intern has a question related to an area that I'm that I have something to say about, I may get connected through either in an event themselves. I get approached by the person, or I get a call from the program director asking if I can help out, whether someone can come in and shadow, or they can discuss career issues. That's definitely a source of definitely a lot of connection. It's also been a source of mentorship for me, where I have sought mentorship for my own sake by elders in my community. And so that's definitely something to think about. And a little bit of a variation on something Natalie already mentioned, this idea of going to conferences. And I would say, in addition to participating in presentations and panels and things like that, another important part that's been really that's helped me connect with folks, that's been doing talks, not just like in big fancy conferences, but also in everyday work. Whenever there is an opportunity, for example, to speak about culture at the courthouse, I've done Cultural Awareness Month, and then that lets people know that that's an area of interest for me. And so then, since then, either folks come and talk to me about that, and I've had folks from the courthouse connect me with very young professionals that are in criminal justice who want a perspective on psychology, like Natalie said, or they need someone for a homework project for their college. And again, those are great opportunities for connection, because it allows people to know that this is an area of interest for you, whether in mentorship in any of these areas, but specifically for underrepresented professionals, that they'll know that you're open and able to do this.
Yeah, I think we've both done the interview, the school project
Yes.
interview.
Yes.
And so, in thinking about what we all can do, so consider finding your own networks of professional support around an area of interest or identity, and be available. Just be available, be open to help, for others seeking help, to offer support, and pay attention in your systems and see if there's somebody who could use some support, who seems isolated, who might be experiencing some barriers. That would be an opportunity right there. I would also add to just pay attention to the world around you. So who is looking for people to join a project? What professional society is soliciting applications for grants? Are there any development programs in your institution that would be ideal for a junior employee? I've done that before. Oh, hey, did you hear about this program? You should consider applying for it. Or maybe if a junior colleague has this anxiety-provoking meeting with some sort of VIP or something. So what should they know about interacting with any VIP or interacting with that particular VIP? And then I would also add to just highlight excellence. So when you see somebody doing something fantastic, let other people know about it. So maybe, I don't know, shoot an email to their boss. Oh, hey, Dr. Guzman did this thing and it was like really fantastic in this specific way, and it helped with this, and I just wanted you to know. Or maybe if there was an announcement, circulate an announcement around your networks. Hey, did you hear Dr. Smith did this thing? It was fantastic. And that helps sort of elevate people. One thing I find about this field, and I'm going to just speak collectively about like everybody in it, it's just a bunch of like smart people, hardworking people who are just like, oh, you need what from me? Okay, I'm just going to go ahead and do it, and then just kind of be quiet, and that's just what we do. And so highlighting, when somebody's doing something really really stand up, because I feel like we don't know to do that, or we just kind of think like, oh yeah, no, we are supposed to produce excellent work and to deliver high quality kind of ethical services. And so, but I think it's really helpful to once again shine a light when somebody's doing that in a really notable way. And I don't know, Lara, what else you'd like to add?
Oh, I echo what you said. I think, yeah, that sometimes we're so focused on the day to day, and it's hard to kind of get outside our context to see things in a broader way. So just finding those opportunities outside the box, and highlighting again the positives, and also sitting with the discomfort. But I think one of the things that I am focused on as well is this idea of longevity being, a form of resistance, right? Because, there certainly were so many times where I could have decided to just leave the field because it was too much. But, so helping others stay is a form of resistance as well. And I know that, we have 5 minutes for questions. So, and I see that the chat has a good amount. So just wanted to maybe transition to that.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for that. And before I get into those questions, I just want to say that there were several comments that came in, people just saying how appreciative they were that you were taking on this topic and feeling very validated and seen by you guys giving this talk. So I just wanted to make sure that that was said.
Oh, thank you. See, once again, people out there doing excellence and just not not being like recognized about it.
Right. So the first question is, somebody asked if you could give an example of a psychologized understanding that pathologizes a common cultural experience or behavior.
There could be so many examples, but one that just pops into my head that's very contextual to my being in the court clinic is sometimes having for example a person of color, specifically maybe like a Latina woman, express emotion while after being arrested, and how sometimes that could be assumed to be either dangerous, either for violence to self or others, when a person is expressing intense emotion. So oftentimes I try to differentiate the two, because I think sometimes hearing intense emotion from a person of color to someone who's maybe making certain assumptions or not questioning certain assumptions could immediately create a sense of urgency or that someone needs to act on it, right? And so does that mean that people are going to secure the person, restrain them, etc.? So that would be an example of sort of questioning things before you act. That I think it's really immediate, at least in the setting where I'm at.
Okay. Yeah, thank you for that example. Somebody was asking also if you could speak to matching a little bit more and what characteristics that is typically related to.
So the literature where I've seen it discussed is really specifically focused on like racial or ethnic identity lines. So matching like with like or gender. That's usually what is meant from that. And it's not something that's always doable, just given, compositions. Yeah, I think that answered the question.
Yeah, I think that so. Thank you. And then another question came in that to start, the caveat is that they recognize this is a very broad issue, but they are wondering about how you might approach a problematic performance in a sensitive way for someone who's an underrepresented trainee or psychologist. Are there specific methods or resources you would recommend when developing a remediation plan, for instance?
That's a really good question. So what I would say is, and I try to start the mentoring relationship by talking a little bit about identity, like our identities. And I do that for a lot of reasons. One being to kind of show that I'm open to talking about this, also to show like to kind of model what it, hey, when I have a conversation with like, when I'm doing an evaluation and this comes up, this is how I ask some of these questions. And then also just to kind of get a sense of who people are, before they went to graduate school, for instance, and sort of what context they're coming from. In some instances, it's sort of like in some instances, the issue might be a bit of a cultural mismatch. So like Lara really just kind of talked all about it, but somebody's being perceived in a certain way, but you get sort of the background information. I've seen this come up in consideration of like actually class as well, where you kind of get the backstory of where this person's coming from, and then that kind of explains some stuff, or that provides some context, and then that opens the door to some conversations about like, oh, and here's like the institutional kind of thought or expectation, or like you can kind of see where things are being missed. And then in talking about, was the question about problematic or remediation? Thinking about that with sensitivity, but then also being able to identify like these are the specific practices. And I don't mean like the cultural, expectations of like, I don't know, how do you wear your hair or whatever, but the basic ethical, like we need this, and this, and this is why, being kind of specific and clear on that, making and assessing whether there's anything going on, and using that to guide how you move forward.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the, you make so many assumptions, and obviously it's like the person said, it's a broad question that could take so many forms, but you assume that the system is moving to have this person do a certain thing that they haven't done, or do change behavior or something like that, and then this person is in the middle trying to implement this, whether it's a supervisor or a mentor or someone like that. And so it sounds like there's a heavy influence of the system, but I often wonder in this kind of situations, where is the voice of the person who is subject to the remediation, right? So I think it's going to be much more effective if people have a voice and a say in how things are done, versus whether they feel that it's done to them. And so this idea of, traditionally we think of remediation plans as, okay, these are the rules, these are the steps, you're going to follow them or you're going to be in violation, right? But do we allow the person to have a say in what the problem is, and conceptualizing what the problem is and what makes sense for them so that they can meet a certain standard? I can think of, for example, even examples where folks have approached me about people who I've supervised, about things that as I've heard them, I thought to myself, oh, that seems like an interesting problem. Like, for example, reaching out about a woman of color's dress code in a certain setting, and having this conversation of, okay, but who is seeing the problem here, right? Or I've had instances where I've been mentoring or supervising students whose first language is not English. And the question is how competent they are in doing a certain test or something like that. So then it's kind of them also reframing the question and allowing pushing back also on these systemic norms, and that define the problem a certain way. And I think that is also that there should be a more kind of bilateral kind of feedback loop in those kinds of situations.
Yeah, those are all such excellent points and considerations when thinking about a complicated situation like that.
Yeah.
So thank you both so much for all of your knowledge and expertise today. That was the last question that we had for you.
Thank you so much for inviting us. We're very excited to do this.
Yes, we really appreciate it. And so that wraps up this week's Law and Mental Health series. Next week, we will have Dr. Caitlin Kavanaugh discussing adolescent development and the juvenile justice system. We hope to see you then for another great discussion of issues of behavioral health and the law. See you then.
Thanks.
Thank you so much.